Okay, so we'll start admitting people. Let's go. We'll admit all. Admit all. Here we go. Morning, David. Morning, Bob. Morning, Peter. Morning, Con. Morning, William. Morning, John. Morning, Kevin.
Morning, Steve. Morning, Henry.
Oh, you're in as Con Keating, Con. That's where's Elspeth gone? Oh, so disappointed.
Different laptop.
Oh.
Yeah, it's amazing technology, isn't it?
It's amazing technology. Absolutely amazing. Morning, Chris. Thanks for joining. Morning, Podreg. Thanks for joining. If you've just joined, if you could mute, please, that would be great. Just to reduce background noise, that would be excellent. So thank you. And let's bring Derek in. Morning, Derek. Thanks for joining. Appreciate that. Henry joins us from the wildest, darkest parts of Scotland, which look absolutely beautiful, Henry, don't they, where you are?
Yeah.
So,
for my friends who got inclination courses, I'll try and give you a shot of what it looks like.
Yeah, some blue sky thinking. There you go. Look at that. Oh,
that's where we are. And if I could get round a little bit further,
looks like
Shahanagan,
looks like,
or Schiehallion, sorry, just
looks like Croydon, Henry.
Yeah, just like Croydon.
Yeah. Let's bring Barry. Let's bring Barry in as well. Morning, Barry. Thanks for joining. Morning, Christopher.
Morning.
Thanks for joining. If you could mute, please, that would be great.
Actually, Steve, if you turn Addington into a lake, Croydon would become much.
Lake at the New Addington would be brilliant. Lake, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Don't quote us on that though, Podreg. But it'd be a great idea. So there we go. Okay, excellent. Well, it's now 10:31, 10:32. Thanks everyone for joining this week's Pension Playpen Coffee Morning. We are joined by our chairman, Henry. Delighted to have you on board, Henry, and fighting fit, which is great. I know that the main theme is obviously spring budget and pension policy, but I think you wanted to say a few words, Henry, on a few bits and pieces, which is the floor is yours. But before we start, I'm saying that we are recording, so everybody thumbs up that we're recording, and thanks indeed for that. And we will post a video and a podcast later today on the Pension Playpen website. In the usual fashion, I'm sure Henry won't mind people raising hands to interrupt him or ask him questions or challenge him. Henry loves a challenge, so please raise a hand when you would like, and also comments in the chat would be great as well. So without any further ado, I will pass you on to Henry. Henry, over to you and wonderful Scottish Highlands.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. And it is very wonderful. And we look like we're going to get 16, 17 degrees today, which is quite something for Scotland on the first day of April. And you might think that it's an April Fool's Day when you hear the phrase spring budget, because of course it wasn't a budget, it was a statement of intent. And I think a lot of people had an expectation, perhaps going back a few years ago when we used to get a budget in the spring, that we were going to get a lot of fiscal measures which would impact our lives in pensions. But let's put it round another way. An awful lot of pensioners will have their lives very much changed here on the 1st of April, not least because a lot of benefits are changing and not always for the goods. A lot of employers will find that their national insurance bills are going to be a lot higher from today. They know it. It's been a very difficult few months for the people who manage our pensions, because they have to face up to some quite difficult costs associated with payroll, and they will be thanking the Chancellor for not increasing the mandatory pension costs from auto-enrolments, and instead concentrating on other things. And those other things we expect to see not in this spring statements, but in the pensions bill, which we expect to see at the end of this month or early in May, which should say a lot more about decumulation, as we like to call it, or pensions, as the general public like to think of it, e.g. the payment of the money that's been saved back to people by way of a regular income stream until the day they die, a pension. So my take on what Rachel Reeves actually said in the statement is that she is a woman who understands there is a serious problem, a message which is entirely aligned to what was said by Torsten Bell at the PLSA conference in Edinburgh, where he said that we need to get realistic about what can and cannot be done for people. And instead of thinking of pensions as a means to build up wealth, we should be thinking about maximizing the income which the pensions, which we've already established, bring. And when I think about the situation which a lot of pension schemes are in today, I think it's hard to imagine back in 2012, would we have imagined that Nest would have £50 billion in it, that People's Pension would have £33 billion. LifeSight wasn't even in people's imagination then, but it now has over 25 billion. And Legal & General was a group personal pension provider with no interest in occupational pension schemes, but now has a couple of master trusts which between them have got over £30 billion. So pensions, in the sense which are loosely used for these savings vehicles, have exploded and will continue to grow over the next few years until they start getting to a point where the amount of money that comes in by way of savings is matched by the amount that gets paid out by way of pensions, however that pension is drawn. And quite understandably, the Treasury and the DWP are looking at these large consolidated pots, such as the ones I've mentioned, and starting to think, how can we actually make these pots become a source of income without losing the power of them being invested in the markets? In other words, is there another way of paying pensions other than through annuities? And this is really, I think, something that we in pensions have to think about, because the growth agenda, which is so critical to the success of Britain going forward, is largely dependent on transferring large amounts of money, which is currently in the defined benefit and defined contribution system, trillions of pounds, into the hands of people without losing the fundamental capacity of that money to do good for this nation. And to do so in such a way that we do not destroy the borrowing process of this country, which is dependent on our gilt system. And we are in a very difficult position as it stands at the moment, with our DB system being dismantled by the insurance industry, with large amounts of gilts being sold in exchange for bonds. We are unlikely to see pensions being very helpful as a source of succor for the government's borrowing. So one way or another, things have got to change in pensions. We've got to see more money invested in growth stocks, and we all know what that means. It means a movement towards UK investment into UK equities, into UK infrastructure, whether that be quoted or unquoted. And I'm quite sure that that message is being knocked around with these large new schemes. But we've also got to start thinking about pensions as a whole of life projects rather than simply as saving schemes to be dissipated through pension freedoms. Fine for the wealthy, for the top 20%. Irrelevant really to those people at the bottom end for whom DC is pretty peripheral to their financial situation. Pension credit being much more important. What we must be thinking about is how pensions can help people in that middle 60%. Yeah, those people who don't have financial advisors and don't need help from pension credit. I think that that's where most of the government's thinking is going on right now. And while I didn't hear Rachel Reeves talk a lot about this, she did touch upon it in her speech. There are going to be some questions coming up, which Stephen's lined up for me, dealing with what Reeves didn't say, which is quite a lot. She wasn't that interested in dishing out transactional instructions for us on what we should be doing with our pensions. But in her general tone, I think that she wanted us to take things very seriously in the weeks, months, years to come. Her first really major spring statements of this government. And just as with Torsten Bell, I came away feeling that there's an awful lot of change that's going to happen over the next 5 years. Well, that was really what I had to say. And I've said it in the 12 minutes I thought it was going to take. But I expect most people in this audience have their own views.
Yeah, there's going to be quite a few questions coming in, Henry, I think. I know that Podreg's talking about government looking to pension funds as a source of succor, then a source of suckers. So thank you. Podreg, that's very kind. Yeah. Before we move on, Henry, I met my briefly my niece, my 22-year-old niece, this week for a funeral. Which she flew over from Seattle. She works for Starbucks and she's 22. Her employer pays 5% and she pays 5% and she's 22. So a 22-year-old Starbucks worker is getting 10% into her pension. And I thought, that's interesting comparison to the UK model, which is still where UK employers are paying 3 and then members are paying 5. What's your opinion, Henry? Is it more about profit and shareholders than member needs and staff needs for a decent living in retirement?
Well, we have a semi-mandatory 3 plus 5 arrangement, of which of that 5, 1% is paid by way of income tax relief, and is not on total earnings, but on the band of earnings. Is it enough? Well, clearly it's not. What's it there for? It's a top up to the state pension, isn't it? Yeah, it is not the primary pension for a lot of people. It's effectively an ABC to their state pension. Now, we could move, and a lot of people have speculated, but we will move towards a different system whereby the state becomes a means-tested pension, as it is in Australia, and where we have a mandated contribution into people's pensions, which is much higher. We may move to that system some stage in the future, but I see absolutely no intention among those in the DWP or HMT to move to the promise which was made in 2017 with the auto-enrolment review, that we would move to a higher contribution rate by the middle of this decade, and we are bang in the middle of this decade, in case you haven't noticed. So that particular requirement for people to pay more is clearly not a requirement. As I said just now, it's the responsibility of the Pensions Minister to make that happen, and he's made it quite clear he does not see it as a priority. So in answer to your question, Steve, at the end of the day, let's not see a change in contributions at a mandatory level as a priority in this government.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of my questions to ask you, was about the attacking of the, I think the estimate is 140 billion cost of the state pension system. Do you actually genuinely think that will be attacked in the autumn budget or not?
Well,
is that just saber rattling or not?
The main reason that people have said it's going to be at risk is because Torsten Bell has in the past, both in writing and vocally, I remember sitting on a panel with him, and he actually said that he wanted to see an end to the triple lock, and he may well see that out. But if he does, it will save some money. It won't make a major difference. And certainly not the kind of difference you're talking about. So I see the state pension as most likely to continue to grow over time, just because it doesn't currently meet the needs. And I saw some very strange stuff in the press saying, oh goodness, there will come a time where the state pension will actually move people into tax payment because they got income from nowhere else. Virtually nobody gets just the state pension. Most people who are in that situation get something for the benefits if they've got nothing else. And the reality is that very few people find themselves caught in a sort of an income tax problem at that lower end. That's not the big issue we should be worried about. The worry is very much more about the people who've got £30,000-40,000 in pension pots from saving, who feel that they have some kind of pension which is going to be good enough for them. And I fear that when they start using the pension dashboard, as the pension dashboard will be read, they will see that their actual income, both from the state and from their personal pensions, is going to be insufficient for their needs, and there will be quite a lot of pain there. So that's the worry I have, not the cutting of the state pension. I'd be interested in any interviews.
Yeah, just on that note, Henry, as well, just as a reminder to all on this call, don't forget there is this NI top-up campaign going on at the moment, which I think ends on the 4th or 5th of April. So if you know anybody who's got gaps in their national insurance payments, they need to get their gateway ID and get a 18-digit code or 16-digit code or whatever it is from the Future Pension Service and pay and get in the system. Otherwise, use it or lose it. So if anybody of you know, particularly women carers who have got a gap, then please, from Pension Playpen and everybody on this call, try and encourage people to get hold of the Future Pension Service and try and claim it. Because if you don't, it'll be lost. And I think that's been covered on Radio 4's Money Box as well. And Martin Lewis and everybody else have been banging on about it. But
yeah, it's great. It's great that we get people to do that. One other thing to mention, Richard Smith is speaking on the Quiet Room seminar tomorrow. If you're time rich as I am this week, you might want to attend that as well. You may be already. I think Richard's quite excellent, and he was the guy who required that the pots that we have accumulated in DC pension saving, are shown in terms of their income capacity, and that's what I was referring to when I said that the pension dashboard is going to lead a lot of people to review their pension planning and understand that they haven't got sufficient money in their DC pot to meet their retirement needs. But that's me sounding a bit dismal.
And just to clarify, Henry, that's the whole point of dashboard is it's quoting pensions, not pots, and I think that's going to be a massive eye opener for everybody.
Yeah. So you'll see you will be able to find out what your pot is, but the first thing you'll see is going to be your pension. Good.
Okay, let's move on then. The next question we've got is pension schemes bill. You briefly touched upon that, but what's your thoughts on the pension schemes bill, Henry?
Well, nice guy who's I think he's probably been on this, or he's certainly been in the audience a couple of times, who's been advising the pensions minister, a guy called Andrew Tarrant, who used to be the advisor to Greg McClymont when Greg was the shadow pensions minister. And he's now advising Torsten Bell. And I had a chat with him along with, I think John Hampton was on that call. This was a couple of months ago. And he said what we were told earlier in Edinburgh, which is that concentration will be on DC and in particular on DC decumulation, making sure that people get something akin to a pension for life. So I think that's the thing that interests me most of all, because it's fundamental. There are going to be a lot of other things which I hope are in there. I hope that there's some kind of movement on CDC so that we move a step closer, albeit it won't be a quick step, towards multi-employer CDC schemes, which we need. And I expect we'll see quite a few other bits and pieces in this pensions bill. There's clearly going to be stuff which gets thrown out, which we thought might have been in. And the one thing that I think that will stick around is this decumulation thing. I've heard it from so many different angles now, and it was in the King's speech as well. So my assumption will be that we will have a means to spend our money by decumulation as a default in DC pots. I'll also be very interested to see how the government deals with the personal pension in this, both as SIPs, but probably more important in terms of defaults, in terms of group personal pensions. An awful lot of people are still in group personal pensions and not in money purchase master trusts.
That's true, and there was also a call to maybe move GPPs to master trusts.
Yes.
Interesting point, Henry. Interesting point. We'll come back to that in a minute. Con, you got your hand raised. You want to make a point, Con?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Andy Tarrant was also in Jack Dromey's when Jack Dromey was Shadow Pensions Minister. He was in Jack Dromey's Shadow Kitchen Cabinet, which I was also a member of. Henry, what do you think is the state of play on multi-employer CDC? Are we going to see that in this pensions bill? I get the impression not.
No, I think it may well be promoted as a decumulation option down the line. I spoke to Maggie Rogers of Church of England recently because I was getting quite optimistic we might see multi-employer CDC schemes up and operative fairly shortly. But she said for the Church of England, which she represents, have been given no expectation that we would see CDC before 2027, and it might even be later than that. So this continues to be a slow project. And I would agree with you, Con, that whatever it says in the bill will be very light. There's a separate and important piece of work being done by the DWP in rewriting the legislation for this particular type of product. The Royal Mail DC plan isn't much use to anyone other than the Royal Mail, I'm afraid.
Is it? Are there any plans from anybody applying at the moment for CDC or?
Oh yeah, there are huge numbers of people. If you go around talking to people, there's a group of retail people who are really interested in it. There's a transport group who are really interested in it. I know the Church of England have made it very public, but they want their 720 employers to be able to join a multi-employer CDC. And I would be very surprised if there weren't an awful lot more lurking away. You know, there's a lot of interest because people are fed up with the problems which DC is creating. DC is not a pension, it's a savings plan, and it doesn't work. You need some form of decumulation on a collective basis with some kind of longevity protection, and that can either be achieved through DB, which is hard work because it needs capital, or it can be achieved through CDC, which doesn't require capital, but doesn't provide guarantees. Neither of them are easy. Both of them are taking a long time to get over the line, but you know, people are working on it.
Could the government change auto-enrolment then, so that from a particular date, all auto-enrolment contributions go to CDC from a given date? Is that just too hard a nut to crack, Henry?
I think it's more likely to say that a DC plan must have some kind of decumulation default, which provides people with protection against living too long. And I reckon that would be an interesting area to see value for money comparisons. Because you'll be able to see pretty clearly who's providing good ways to convert your DC to pension and which aren't. That's an easy one to measure.
That's an easy one. Yeah, that's true. Peter has very kindly mentioned about the PPF amendment to remove the need to set a levy. Is that suggesting that the PPF levy is going to disappear altogether or be reduced? I don't quite know the angle there, but if it could be reduced or cancelled, that would be great, wouldn't it, for employers?
Yeah, it would be great for employers. Nobody wants to pay those levies when the scheme's in. I was saying this morning 7 or 8 billion, which I thought was the size of it. And Andrew Young said that the actual DB surplus could be calculated as much as £13 billion. I mean, it's just phenomenal. I mean, look at the LGPS surpluses, look at the PPF surpluses, and ask yourself, just what is all this money doing, sitting there doing nothing? Yeah. And why are we calling in more money in by way of levies for the PPF and contributions into super well-funded LGPS right now, when the likes of Birmingham City Council, cannot even afford to clear rubbish, and where a lot of organisations who are really hard pressed are having to pay pension levies to the PPF? Doesn't make sense to me, and it really needs to review.
I agree.
Peter, I know what the argument is, which is if we get rid of the levies, we'll never be able to get it back again. Well, good.
Okay. There you go. Peter, you got your hand raised. Go.
Yeah, it was just the point I was going to raise, that in fact the PPF have in recent statements sort of indicated they want the requirement on them to effectively charge a levy to be removed, because it's distorting the pattern. When I have discussions with companies, however, the PPF levy is regarded as a big penalty of having a DB pension scheme, and they're thinking of it in terms of the levy that was set when they first established the levy 20 years ago. And when I've challenged them to look at how much they're paying this year, they are overestimating the levy by something like 20 to 30 times the actual payment that they're making. even now if they've got an open DB or they've got a DB scheme subject to levy. So it's wildly overemphasised. The levy is set this year at £45 million across all the 4,000, whatever it is, number of schemes that are subject to the levy. And if you sort of scale that down, it's very low in an individual basis. In our case, it's below £5,000 per year for the company. So it's mildly, but that raises the issue about all these companies have paid levies over the last 20 years, and then they bought out their liabilities with an insurance company, or bought them in anyway, so they're no longer at risk of the levy. So effectively, companies are regarding it as a bit of a con altogether now, and the government, this large pot is there, not paying out benefits to people, and just being invested. So
yeah,
Okay, Peter.
well, we will hope for something about the PPF in the pensions bill. I think it's fairly likely that's to be the case. So we've heard this talk about GMP pre-97 rectification, so that people get some kind of payment. Of course, you open that door, and the next thing you know, you open the door to just about every other claimant, including WASPI, for that matter. But let's see what happens.
Okay. Con, before we move on, Con, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the man who has been doing an awful lot in terms of negotiating down the PPF levy for smaller schemes is Charles Malcolm Brown, who runs Dixon's pension scheme, but also heads the SME consulting group, which the PPF and pensions regulator refer to and consult. So if you're trying to get levies down even more, he's probably the man to speak to.
Yeah, I'd rather expected him to be on this call actually, because Charles usually is, and I'll certainly send him details of what's been said. If not the video, actually the video is the easiest way of doing it. So let's not forget, Steve. Let's get the video up for those who couldn't make it today.
Yeah, of course.
Do you really think, Henry, that we will see increases in the PPF benefits in this bill? I see there's a strong possibility that the PPF will get the right to set the levy at zero without endangering their ability to raise it subsequently. But I sense that there is real resistance on their part to increasing the benefits.
Interesting. We don't know quite what they have in mind, although that the actuary Sharon spoke alongside John Hamilton and a couple of other people in Edinburgh and intimated that they wouldn't be averse to taking over small DB schemes on a voluntary basis. In other words, you didn't have to be bust. You could just ask for protection from the PPF and they'd take you over. Now, whether that was along the, what LCP had been promoting, was the idea that, you could just basically do a deal with the PPF, get the stuff out of the way. I don't know. But it's that kind of thinking which, I think would be helpful, because these small DB schemes, generally speaking, and Peter, you're a notable exception, haven't got an awful lot good going for them, and they could be managed in a more efficient way.
As a trustee, you can't move your scheme into the PPF if your members are going to receive less than full benefit, if your employer isn't insolvent.
No, absolutely. There would have to be a change.
Yeah, I mean, it's a breach of Section 58, which ought to change anyway, but Section 58 makes the trustees criminally liable.
And we haven't heard about Section 58, which means we haven't got John Hamilton on the call. But we have got one or two people that know exactly what Section 58 means.
What is a Section 58, Con?
Section 58 was introduced. There's 58A and 58B. It's 58B, which is the part which is really offensive. It basically says that if you are a trustee and you do any act which reduces the benefits of scheme members, such as, for example, going into the PPF, then you can be deemed by the pensions regulator to be criminally liable, and the maximum sentence is 7 years in pokey.
Wow.
Pokey is a phrase.
Where is
which
Where
may
is
not be
Pokey?
familiar. Pokey is a fine place. There are versions of Pokey all over the country. Yeah, okay, so that's the situation. We're looking for a growth environment whereby pensions do take risks, deliberate risks over time, and we have Section 58B, which stands in the way of them doing just the same. So
yeah,
very difficult for us to actually see at this present moment any way that trustees can step up and take those kind of decisions which they took 20, 30 years ago. And certainly the situation is not very old, is it, Section 58? I think was it the back 2018-19, Con?
No, it was introduced in
Terrible,
2021.
21.
2021, in the middle of the pandemic crisis. So most people missed it. But it's applied to, and it is now part of the Pensions Act 2004, just retrospectively introduced.
We got the likes of Peter Cameron Brown and Derek Scott on this call. You only have to look at their faces to know whether or not I'm right or wrong. I hope I haven't made any mistakes so far, which are too erroneous.
You're doing very well, Henry. You're doing very well.
Okay, all right. Do you want to ask some more questions? There were some really nasty questions you had there, Peter.
Well, I know, but hang on. I just wanted to say a point about this Section 58 as well. Bob and Con has confirmed that applies to company directors as well as trustees. So that's a small big point, I guess. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. Okay. Let's ask you a really interesting one then. Pensions investment review, stage 2, Henry. What do you think of that?
Not much. I like the lady who's doing it. She used to be at DWP and now she's at HMT, and she's a really nice lady. She's called Jo, I think. Is that right? I've got the second name list now. It's been out of my mind all morning. But I chatted with her up in Edinburgh, and she was great. She was speaking about investment in a way that I hadn't heard a civil servant speaking about investment for a long time. And there was good people from DWP with her, and it sounded to me as if things are on, are going to come out right. But I mean, it's government saying what they want, but you still got things like Section 58 and stuff like that standing in the way of people getting on with it. So we need to see action in a number of ways in order for us to see investment of DB and DC schemes as we'd hope. That would be my point.
Okay.
I don't know. Anyone can put out more. It's not my area.
Very, very topical. New DB surplus rules, Henry. DB surplus. This is the battle between trustees and sponsors and give us our money and all that. So what do you think?
Well, it's a wonderful blog from Con Keating on the ephemerality of these surpluses. They're here today and they're gone tomorrow. A lot of these came out of a disaster that was LDI, and we shouldn't be feeling happy about seeing our schemes in surplus because of the yield and gilts. That's not a good reason to be in surplus. We would be better off having really solid investment strategies in place for schemes rather than temporary or ephemeral surpluses. So that's all I've got to say on that.
Okay. Con, you want to respond or say make a point, Con?
Yeah, we actually see the ONS figures for September, well, for June and September 24, on the 3rd, on Thursday. Basically, the expectation, or at least our model suggests, that the ONS number is likely to be, the ONS asset number is likely to be about 60 billion below the number which the pensions regulator has been using to declare surpluses. Basically, on a low dependency basis, the PPF says that schemes are overall in surplus to the tune of 137 billion. Our analysis makes that number look like a deficit of around 21 billion for schemes overall. Schemes in surplus would have not the 160 billion that TPR has been saying, but around 71 billion. So the idea that surpluses can resolve the productive investment conundrum, problem, whatever you want to call it, looks like it's cloud cuckoo land on the part of the pensions regulator. The pensions regulator also published the other day a paper which I'm yet to read, another survey from OMB, but you know, exactly where that comes out, I don't know yet. I haven't yet read it.
They have quite a nice letter which they put on their website. I think it's linked to my blog if you want to read it, which has got a tick from me and a tick from others. There are people in TPR who are shaping up and saying, okay, we do want people to be investing with a view to getting, you know, growth into their plans, and you know, obviously surplus is what people are trying to build up so they can pay out more and take more risk and so on. Now that's all good, but it has to be done on a sound basis. And you're right, you know, if the numbers aren't right, Con, and the ONS numbers are so different from the DWPs, the TPRs, then we do need to make sure we're starting from the right spot in going forward.
I mean, there's the other point, which is actually my much more basic point. You know, if we are going to talk about productive investment, we should not be talking about investment just of surplus. We should be talking about the investment of a scheme overall. Someone actually described the whole LDI episode in the last day to me as a criminal exercise in economic mismanagement. Yeah, but yeah, well, we'll see what the ONS asset number is, but I think it looks like it's going to come in. If our model is right, it looks like it'll come in around 60 billion lower than TPR's number. And TPR's liability numbers are suspect anyway.
Yeah, I am going to shut my mouth at this point. I don't want to get into a war.
No. Okay, you know, let's go to Peter. Peter, you got your hand raised. Let's hear what you have to say.
Yes, I was just going to pick up on that last point that Con made, that the surplus, there's two sides to the surplus. There's the asset side, and there also is the liability side. And the problem is that the surpluses are measured using a historic measure of to discount the future liabilities of the pension scheme by the discount rate based on gilt yields. And this pattern, which most of you are familiar with, shows the long-term pattern of that, and also why liabilities were so inflated during the LDI crisis. But the two things I want to point out is, firstly, we seem to be back now into the position we were in between about 1997 and the financial crisis in 2008. In terms of gilt yields, and other investment returns are usually related to gilt yields. So we're back to a sort of long-term position, it appears. Whether we'll stay there or whether we will change remains to be seen. But the other thing I pointed out, and I had a quick discussion on this with Con, is the fall in the inflation assumptions. This is the RPI, which now that has fallen quite significantly in terms of the liabilities side of things in the last 9 months or so. Now, part of that is probably due to the swap from RPI to CPIH in 2030, beginning to have an increasing effect on that. And indeed, our own actuarial forecasts put very little difference in the CPIH against CPI in 2030. But this means that they are the liabilities are being reduced, and so that is also distorting the surpluses to show more of a surplus than actually is likely to materialise in the future. So that was a point I wanted to make. So just
well, it's a very interesting one, and one I haven't heard before. I don't know if you want to come back on that, Pete, Con.
You're mute, Con. You're on mute.
Okay. Sorry about this. Having difficulty finding this. I'm not sure. I don't know why we have seen the fall that we have seen in RPI. I'm not convinced that it's due to the proximity of CPI and CPIH becoming dominant, which they will be, of course, from 2030. But they did have a material effect on liability valuations. Liabilities are now taken to be, the projected value of liabilities is now taken to be lower than it was previously. But you know, most schemes have capped liabilities, and you know, it's an area where I think the pensions regulator has got it wrong. You know, if you look at the PPF lowered its liabilities in 2024 by using new actuarial standards by 44 billion. The pensions regulator lowered liabilities by 147 billion. Now, if you think the PPF liabilities are perhaps 85% of the TP number used by the pensions regulator, there's a huge gap. 15% couldn't possibly account for £100 billion difference between the two numbers.
Okay.
All right, Con. No, I appreciate that, and thanks for that, Peter. That graph is very interesting. Yeah. Could you share that graph, Peter? Could you email it to me or Henry? Is that possible, Peter? Or maybe?
Sorry,
maybe not.
Yes, it certainly will do. Yeah,
that'd be great. Thank you. Before we move on, quick, William McGrath. We were talking about DB surpluses, and I know you're a great fan of Run-On. You've also mentioned ARGA as well in the chat. William, what do you want to say about that?
Well, I would just think the extra feature to take on board is that there is another bill coming through this year, which is going to be the Audit and Reporting Regulation Authority is going to be set up, and that will impact the actuaries. And I've long said the actuaries have been left to their own devices for far too long. And if you look back, as I have been at the Penrose, Morris and Kingman, all said scrutiny of actuaries is what's needed. And if that comes in, it's a new factor, because I'm really keen on, and I think it fits in with all things Con has been saying and Peter's been saying about look at the numbers harder. You need to do a proper risk benefit analysis of where all the schemes actually are. and start looking on scheme specific bases. And when you do that, and it suddenly becomes necessary for the trustees, pushed by the actuaries, pushed by trustees and by sponsors to do the numbers properly, I think you start producing all sorts of new ramifications. And I think if we can persuade, and remember the ARGA is going to be a bill really driven by business and trade, not by the pensions industry, then I think that could be a sort of left field factor, which comes to make a big difference to the way the market develops. Because I think, basically as soon as actuaries actually have to knuckle down and produce reports on to comply with my very favourite TAS 300, then it will make a big difference.
Yeah. You don't think TAS 300 is enough then, William?
Well, I think TAS 300 does make it's a very good regulation, to be honest. I think it's well produced, and TAS 300 version 2 is coming, and with that, I think it just needs to have people made to do it, and that is, you can have more regulation forever. Just comply with the one that's there, and as soon as the actuaries thought somebody's actually looking, and there's going to have to, and it can be a cross-regulatory team looking at it, but as soon as the sums are being actually audited, reviewed, then some of Peter's points will all come out, and people will actually have to work out what they want to do. And if the government wants to help the industry evolve, well, fix the numbers by making it more attractive to run on than get out, because that's what TAS 300 requires you to do. Make a comparison between run on and get out. So I think this is a great time to be doing lots of lobbying, and that's why I think stuff you've been doing, Henry, is terrific. Getting stuck in, just there is more opportunity now than I think there has been for a long time to actually change the landscape.
Thank you, William, and thank you to Chris Giles. It was indeed Joe Gibson, Chris, who was behind, or is behind, the pension investments work. I think Con's still got his hand up. Have you still got your hand up, Con, or have you taken it down?
No, I do have a further point to make.
Yeah.
ARGA is going to provide the overview, the regulatory oversight for actuaries, though it's actually enforced by, or will be enforced by, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. But we still have a need to regulate the investment consultants. Now, in many cases, they're the same people, but regulatory consultancy has not been and isn't a regulated activity, and frankly, it should be. We've had several recommendations, and including the FCA suggesting that they should be regulated. It's a great hole in what's been going on, and it's allowed some really stupid asset allocations, such as LDI, to be followed. Let's regulate them and make them responsible and liable for their advice.
We seem to have come quite a long way from where we were originally, which was a discussion on what Rachel Reeves was or wasn't doing with pensions. I think that's probably because of the absence. I did listen to Nico and Darren's talk on their podcast, and they couldn't spend more than about 10 seconds out of their 1.5 hours, however long they take in doing these things, talking about Rachel Reeves. The reality is that it wasn't a pensions conversation, but I think that it does actually mean we're moving into a different world where we're going to have to be a lot more thorough in the way that William and Con and Peter are demonstrating things, and not allow our investments to be organized by organizations who are moving us inexorably towards insurance. It worries me that so many large actuarial consultancies are now owned by insurance brokerages. And I was sorry to see Barnett Waddingham becoming part of Alexander Howden last week, after we'd seen the likes of Reddington and Bacon Woodrow, so many part of insurance brokerages. And I think this is something that the government's going to really have to face up to, which is that, as it stands at the moment, a very large proportion of our productive finance capability is slipping out the window in this shift towards insured annuities instead of invested pensions.
Okay, Henry, I'm conscious that we've got about five or 6 minutes to go. Couple of questions. Mansion House King's Speech, is that all still on track, do you think?
Yes.
It's the first question.
Yes, it is.
Yes. Okay. Second question, what do you think then will be attacked in the autumn budget? That's quite a big one, I think. But what do you actually think will be attacked realistically?
I don't have any thoughts for it. I tried really hard to think, oh yeah, what am I worried about? I'm frankly, I'm not worried about how they go about stopping people using money meant for pensions to basically protect people against inheritance tax. That seems to be a silly use of pension money and the tax reliefs that go with 10 pensions. So I'm not worried that they see that through. And other fiscal measures, well, I don't see this government making major changes towards tax relief in the way that the Conservative Party tried to do in 2015-16, but failed to see through. I think we're stuck with the tax system we've got right now. So from a fiscal point of view, I think pensions will remain under their current regime, and I don't see any reason for that to change. Anyone who wants to challenge me on that, please do, because I'm not a tax expert. That's
I
gut.
I think John Mather, you got your hand up, and I think you put something in the chat, John. Do you want to just unmute, John?
Yeah, sorry, I've got to go to a meeting in a second, but
Yep.
from the stuff I was looking at, the cash ISAs seem to be coming under threat of redirection of assets. And I think the 20% tax relief, she's not got to give you a bigger tax bill, but she might actually remove some reliefs. And that wouldn't be such a bad thing to get to pensions. But the conversation today has worried me tremendously. You know, if we can't agree on basic arithmetic, I'm very comfortable in a DC world where I know what I've got. Whether it's adequate or not is not the matter, but at least I know where I am. Whereas you've told me that you can't actually count within 100 billion of one another, and that is not advice worth paying for, is it? So anyway, I'm sorry, but very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Yeah,
Thank you, John.
Yeah. One thing I would say is an absolute disgrace is that an awful lot of people haven't been getting their 20% savings incentive, which was granted them a long time ago. And that's because of the RAS versus TPAS type arrangement, where those with, sorry, not TPAS,
Net pay.
Yeah, well, net pay. So that's the word I mean. This is my problem with being a little bit still drunk from that bicycle accident I had in November. I sometimes forget phrases, but
you're doing very well, Henry. Doing very well.
Our net pay situation is being kicked back another year. So people who should have been paid a decent bung of money this year by way of compensation for not getting net pay on their tax relief because they were in that very low earning situation, but paying pension contributions into net pay systems, they won't get their money until 2026. A disgrace, absolute disgrace. So if I had a go at government for one thing, it would be dilatory behaviour towards those poor people.
Okay, and in the chat, Barry Mack has suggested means testing of basic state pension could be proposed. Barry, I think that's what you're saying in that. Is that Henry? I mean, we touched on that earlier.
I don't see means testing We have means testing of pension credit quite properly, but we don't have means testing of basic pension. The Australians do. I don't want to go to the Australian system, please. But anyone?
Okay. Last minute or two. New pensions minister. What are your thoughts?
Bloody good. Yeah, the first time I've heard a pension minister liken himself to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. A man with such confidence that I suspect he expects to be both. My only worry is that we don't get to keep him for very long. While we have him, let's enjoy him.
Okay. And last question. Magic wand, Henry.
Oh,
you're now Harry Potter, or probably Dumbledore. But you know, let's say you're in Harry Potter world. Magic wand. What would you do, and what would you recommend?
Well, I've mentioned it already. I'd like to see the people like me in their 50s and 60s looking forward to a pension at the end of their DC saving, and not freedom from pensions. And they should all have the right to opt out of pensions, which is what you can do, but they should be defaulted into a pension at the back end of their DC saving. And I'd like to see a revolution, if you like, in the way in which we deal with, to use a horrible word, deal with decumulation.
Okay.
I'll shut up now. It's past 11:30.
There you go. You've done a fantastic job, Henry, and we really appreciate your input and thoughts. Lots of virtual clapping from the audience, I think. Yeah, Derek's clapping, Christopher's clapping, Barry Max. Yep, absolutely brilliant, Henry. So thank you very, very much indeed for that.
Thanks very much.
You know, we wish you continued recovery and good health. You're playing
Thank
golf
you.
later, so I hope you get a few pars and maybe a birdie or two as well. So there you go.
Unlikely. Thank you very much. Yeah. All
So
right.
there you go. Good stuff.
Good.
Well, Henry, thank you very much indeed. Thanks everyone for joining today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Next week, we've got Julius Pasale, investment guru, Julius Pasale, talking about investments. So that should be quite a good session. So yeah, please join us next week. And the video from today will be up later on. And if anybody wants that slide, please email me. I think that's going to come through shortly. So thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate your input and your time and your questions. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Con, and thanks, Chris. Thanks, Peter, for your input. And enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll speak soon. All right, take care. Thanks a lot. Bye.